We're going
Hey,
live
Peter.
because we call it a live thing. Hey, Adam,
Hey, what's up,
I know what
man?
you're gonna ask me. I know what
What?
you're gonna ask me.
What am I gonna ask you?
I'm well. You're gonna say I'm looking a little different today, and is this a live thing, right?
Yes, you look way different, and it is a live thing. Welcome everybody to the live
Okay.
edition of the. This is the awkward intro because we don't have our music. Welcome to a live edition to the You'll Hear It podcast. We are live on YouTube. We are live with the marvelous Connie Han. Connie, how are you today?
I'm doing fabulously. Thank you. How are you guys?
We're doing okay. We're doing okay. Pete, how you doing? Pete's, he's not doing well. He's ditching his earpods already. He's
Are they falling in the
minding.
toilet?
I mean, that's where they go. I actually just had to
Yeah.
order a new pair because I lost the thing, the charger thing.
Yeah, they're easy to lose, and I think that's the secret to Apple's cash cow. They're depending on people's inevitable clumsiness to lose very small
So, Connie,
AirPods.
how are you during all this? Peter and I were just actually talking. You were supposed to be here in St. Louis, where we are, in early May, late April, early May, and we were
Yep.
looking forward to coming and see you. But that obviously, along with everything else, has been canceled. But are
Check,
you?
check.
You're obviously you're releasing your new record, Iron Starlet, in about a week and a half, right? June 12th, I think, is the date.
Yep, that's coming up quick.
Nice. And so, um, we've been, I've been listening to the tracks that are available so far online, and it sounds absolutely amazing. I wonder if you could talk about.
Thank
I
you.
saw, yeah, I read somewhere about, and oh my gosh, this guy, Peter, you
Now I
okay?
can hear you.
Are you
Yeah,
sure?
I'm okay. I couldn't hear you. I don't know what's up, man. I don't know what's up. I'm sorry, Connie. How you doing?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
We are a
You
finely
doing
tuned
okay?
machine. I'm doing all right. I got microphones here. I got AirPods. I got too much stuff. What I don't have is an audio engineer here because we're still socially distancing and quarantined here at the open studio. This is what
Oh,
happens when you have a piano
yeah.
player in charge of audio.
Dude, we've all
But
become just mediocre audio engineers in the past 2 months.
that's
Everybody
right.
is kind of
That's
like
right.
that.
Well, you guys definitely are holding out more than the average person. The average person is now like the pandemic no longer exists, pretty much.
Yes, well, we
So,
are in
Right.
Missouri, so we've seen that firsthand.
Right.
Actually, there was a whole pool party you might remember that was in the news,
Yes.
right,
yeah.
right down the road here. But
Lake of the Ozarks. Yeah.
we want to talk.
Adam and I were not in attendance at that. You can look at any of those videos very closely. You will not see us there. I want to make that clear.
My mom was
We're
there.
in
All
That
Missouri,
was
right.
but we're not
embarrassing.
of
My
Missouri.
mother was there. That was really embarrassing.
I
Yeah.
will take your word for it. Well, your
Uh,
mother likes to party, I'm sure.
She
so
really does.
Connie, so I don't know how much I missed as I was sloppily getting my act together, but Connie, you were actually supposed to be here in St. Louis just a couple of weeks ago, I believe, right?
Yep. We were going to do a residency for Jazz St. Louis at the Bistro, and that, along with everything
Right.
else, dissolved, understandably.
Well, so
Yes.
as we were researching
Yeah.
here,
And I'm hoping that's being rescheduled.
Yes, it is. And forgive me, I don't have the
Oh, good.
exact dates on hand, but it will be in,
Okay.
actually, it's going to be in 2021, in March 17th through 21st, 2021. So look out for that. Yeah. In fact, we should meet up.
Nice. That's good.
Yeah.
We should. I mean, I'm actually looking out our windows here at Open Studio, and I can see we're on the other side of an alley and a parking lot from the Jazz at the Bistro. So
yeah,
you'll be close
we're
by, which will be great.
we are right around the corner from all that.
Dope.
But we were. Now I'm having audio issues. We were in researching your new record, Iron Starlet, out June 12th. We came across an interview where you were talking about Black Codes from the Underground, Wynton Marsalis's Black Codes on the Underground. Now that album has been a frequent topic of conversation on this podcast. Like it's one of Peter's fully like main influence albums. Kenny Kirkland is our dude, and
That's amazing.
we've talked about it a bunch. I would love to hear. I mean, I hear a lot of in your playing. I hear influences from all kinds of people, McCoy and Kenny Kirkland, and I wonder, I wonder if you could talk about that album's influence on you, and
Yeah.
and your takeaway from it, and how it's influenced your music, if at all, and influenced this new record, if at all.
Yeah. Well, I consider Black Codes to be the main cornerstone of my musical philosophy, the base of my playing, my vocabulary, the way I approach playing with a rhythm section, particularly with the drummer. A big part of the way I express myself on stage is to have a very incisive connection and dynamic with the drums that is inspired by, the Kenny Kirkland and Jeff Tain Watts chemistry that was just fucking palpable. I mean, it's something that I listened to for like years and years and years. Of course, I listen to it now, but especially during my early teen years, that's like all I listened to. And the Young Lions aesthetic, like that sound, is so unique because it's post-fusion. So it is like first and foremost super straight ahead, but it is also like indirectly informed by a more modern approach to rhythm that you wouldn't have found in like the 50s and 60s records. And Iron Starlet and the trio and my band, it's a collaborative project between myself and my producer Bill Wyzaski, who plays drums as well, and he feels pretty much exactly the same way as I do. He is like super inspired by that music, and what we primarily love about it is that it is still tough. Like it's like balls to the wall, super passionate, aggressive, but still like intellectually, stimulating, and it has something to say. But it's still got so much raw, like primal energy, and obviously it's not like the entirety of my musical influence, but I pretty much like thought about that at least 10 to 12 hours a day for like 6 to 7 years straight. Yeah. So
you and Peter Martin,
yeah.
those you be both. That's the jam.
Oh man, that's
Yeah.
so dope, Peter. Wow.
Well, and
I've never met
I
another
gotta tell
piano
you,
player
it's so
who cares about that shit. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but just thought I'd say that.
no. No, it's, you got to understand, it's so cool. And when I started, I saw your post a couple weeks ago on your YouTube channel, kind of talking about Dark Chambers and your influences, and you were so direct with it, which I love, because a lot of times musicians, younger or otherwise, they want to say, they want to check all the boxes of different things, and of course, and I know you love McCoy Tyner, you've talked about him, and all these influences that we all have. But I think it's a very strong statement to come out and say, okay, this, and I want to know, like, is we can get into his Dark Chambers, titled, obviously influenced from Black Codes, but also Chambers of Tain, of course, even taking some of the title. But I love, because as jazz musicians, we're always recycling ideas and borrowing and handing down. And sometimes, too many times, we're afraid to be like, I don't want to say this was directly from that. But you really just come out, you're like, this is my jam. And here's the jam that I created based upon my jam,
Yeah.
And it's very honest, and I love it. And for me, and not just because I love that album, but I'll tell you, I want to know how you came to, because like how you're describing your early teenage years, that was exactly like that for me, but except I went to the record store and got that record in 1985. I was 14 years old, and that's when I got the record. But I had just heard them play live like a month before it came out. Kenny Kirkland, Charnette Moffett, Jeff Watts, Brad from Marsalis, Wint Marsalis, right around the corner from here at Powell Hall. And I got to meet Kenny Kirkland, and it was like, the record's coming out. And I heard him play the music. And it was such an exciting thing to pick that record up. And then, very similar to you, just listening. I was obsessed with that record. And I was actually with the group of we had a little band or whatever. We tried to play. I mean, that's not a good record to try to just play the music from when you're that age. I mean, it's one thing to be obsessed with, to just like, oh yeah, let's play Blue Monk, and then we're gonna play Chambers of Tame after that. So, but it's so cool for me to hear, these ideas and that, these powerful musical documents recycled. But I just want to know how. I mean, what was it? Did somebody tell you about it? Or you happened to hear it? Like, how were you drawn to it?
Yeah, I was hipped to it by Bill. I believe I was attending the Los Angeles County High School for the Arts, and we were checking out a lot of music, including the Kenny Kirkland self-titled album, some classic records, the Big Beat, a lot of really just aggressive, great jazz, like burning hot. And, I went to an arts high school, so like at the time there was a really competitive jazz program, and Bill was teaching there, and he put it on, and that was the stuff that stuck out. And, kind of Blue played and a bunch of Essential records played, but, at the time I didn't know shit about jazz. Like I was at the time classically trained, and I was extremely intrigued by the music. It spoke to me in a unique way that no other genre did at the time. And particularly when I heard those 90s recordings, I was so drawn in, because I think at my core of who I am ever since puberty, I guess, I've always really loved like powerful, tough music. This is not really relevant to my current musical influences, but I used to listen to a lot of like really intense metal and progressive metal and rock and prog rock. And I used to love how intense it was, but they were still trying to say something meaningful. I mean, now looking back, I think a lot of that shit was really pretentious. And then when I found jazz, I was like, oh, this is not easy music. Like,
this is way more pretentious.
This is way more pretentious, and I'm going to go after it. And yeah.
Well, you really do. I mean, on the tracks I've heard, it's tough. It is. You've captured the toughness, I think, that you were after. And good on you. I mean, it really.
Yeah.
And that's not an easy thing to do, but the tracks I've heard from Iron Starlet are just that. They are as tough as I think you can take. They're great.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't want to define my entire musical taste or expression by just the toughness, but I will say that it was the primary cornerstone that like launched, I guess, my ascent into, or rather descent into the rabbit hole of jazz. So,
right.
There was a lot of nuance to be explored as well, and other colors and textures and moods. But I would definitely say that's like the foundation, because, when you're at that age, 14, 15, and you're just absorbing everything like a sponge, like that stuff sticks with you. It's like a positive trauma. So yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
And,
great
I'm
way to
thinking
bring
back
it.
now.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, no, I'm just thinking there's definitely like, there's a quality, and this is the great thing about these jazz albums and this medium in a way, is that it's not even recycling. This stuff is timeless when you hit a certain quality level. So for each generation, there's almost like a teen angst element to something like Black Codes that's very, it's very mature music. It's not likely that there's many teenagers outside of maybe us that are musicians and trying to play that way, that's necessarily an audience for. It's kind of like everybody ends up drinking coffee and bourbon in their life, but when you try to drink it too young, it's like, that's the worst stuff. And I think that a lot of jazz, especially whatever we call modern jazz, falls into that. But I think that there's definitely, like we used to call it with that record, really was just with that band and with Branford Marsalis and Wynton and Tane and all of them, it was like, we call it burnout. Like that whole way of playing, because it's like, and I know in one of your quotes you talked a little bit about, the modern approach of rhythm, and where everything becomes about, between, and you're talking about bass and drums, Tane and Kenny Kirkland, throwing ideas and back and stuff. There's a certain either stationary harmonic sense. Like you're playing over one chord or like a Phrygian vibe, but it's limitless. You can play anything, but everything is about the rhythm and like playing in a way that, and
totally.
this is great to talk about, because I'm kind of remembering how when I first heard all this, I didn't realize what it was, but we got so into, 5 rhythms and 7s and all this. It's all about that. And we called it burn. A lot of people I guess that term kind of fell off after a while, but it was just like, we're going burning out. So you could play harmonically anywhere. But the rhythm had to be kind of by a specific set of codes and stuff.
Didn't we see that in
is that still kind of referred to that way?
Yeah. Burnout is the concise way of putting it. I don't choose to call it that, but I've heard it called that before, and it makes sense because that's what it is. It's using rhythm as a vehicle for progression and creating music and creating a statement rather than harmonic movement. I mean, that's modal, but I definitely distinguish John Coltrane's spiritual motto with Kenny Kirkland and Jeff Tain Wald's, like, I'm gonna kill you modal. Like that's different. There's a different momentum there that is like uniquely angular. And it's dope.
I feel like we saw once, Peter, I feel like we saw a chart from maybe Christian McBride that just said E minor burnout or something like that. And that was
yeah.
official,
he's done a bunch of those. Yeah.
Like that was the direction. So Connie, tell us about the new record. Who's in the band? Where did you record it?
Yeah. Sear Sound in New York City. And we got Jeremy Peltz on trumpets, Walter Smith III on the tenor saxophone, Ivan Taylor on the bass, and Bill Wyzowski on the drums, producer as well, and myself on the piano. Yeah. I would definitely say, though, that
so you got a little East Coast, West Coast going on. A little East Coast, West Coast. I like that.
Yeah, but, I get historically why there's like a geographical distinction, but for me, living on the West Coast as well, I mean, Bill doesn't even live on the West Coast anymore. He just moved to Boston. I consider myself a student of, like, an astute, student of East Coast culture style of playing. Like, I don't fuck with the West Coast. but it's definitely cool because we got Ivan Taylor, who he had a history playing with Mulgrew and Hank Jones, and he is really essential to the product because of his implicit understanding of the pocket and where it's supposed to be. You don't have to ever talk about it. You're not supposed to talk about it, but he understood exactly where that legacy is, that language is. It's all about the fluency of the language. And Bill and I, we were very careful about who we decided to go with for the record, and we wanted people who were not only good but who had a very precise understanding of the language that we go after, which is largely influenced by the Black Codes sound, largely influenced by Hank Jones, McCoy Tyner. I'm trying to think what else. Just that tradition of playing loose and deep, particularly that's driven by the rhythm section. Like, this record to me is really driven by the rhythm section. Walter Smith and Jeremy, they play great, but this record, it's really a meditation on all the explorations that we've done as a trio, because we were really lucky. We had a 5-night tour, straight, and then we went to New York City, and then we just got everything in the can. I think if that hadn't happened, we would have sounded completely different, and in my opinion, not as tight. So, this album is really a meditation on the philosophy of how I want to perform with a trio, and particularly as an accompanist. And it's just sort of like a big artistic vomiting of all my hard work, I guess. I don't know. So So
That's great.
We should put that on a
Yeah.
poster. Someone call Mac Avenue a big artistic vomiting.
Yeah, get that in the
I
marketing.
cannot believe, yeah, that was like the least eloquent thing I've ever said. But what I'm trying to say is that it's
No,
the meditating on all the core values that I've, developed in the past
Well, I think too,
10
like
years. Yeah.
actually the big artistic vomiting is, you know, in this, I'm gonna say early stage of your career because you are still so young. This is what happens. Like you've been just like absorbing, right? Like in this stage, you've been absorbing and absorbing and absorbing and learning for years and growing and growing and growing. And these first few records is there. It's always beautiful for such an artist like you that these first couple of records where it's just like all this stuff comes out that's been waiting to come out for so long, and it's really great to hear.
Yeah.
yeah,
All the compositions are, you know, I like to call each composition a meditation on this particular style, this particular aesthetic, like Mr. Dominator. It's a meditation on the Hank Jones elegant swing that he particularly has on this great record with George Mraz and Elvin Jones. It's called Upon Reflection. I don't know if you guys have heard that, but they play all of Thad Jones's music, another Jones brother. So I guess the Jones brothers have a huge influence on me, and they play like Thad's Pad and Little Rascal on a Rock, and like the way they have this big band synergy, yet they don't have that big band power that is like too gaudy, It's really subtle, and like I wanted to achieve that same level of sophistication and subtlety on Mr. Dominator. So yeah, I mean, I'm very honest and forthright about the heavy influence of the tradition on my music, and that's because I feel that in the current jazz culture, there is this pressure being put on artists, newest artists especially, where they feel in order to stand out, I need to create something from like the ground up. And I need to be totally brand new and original and not play straight ahead jazz and like combine every sonic element I can think of. And there is nothing wrong with that. You do you. But at the end of the day, for me, create great music. And too often, straight ahead jazz and the sound of straight ahead jazz is being vilified as a sort of antique art form that should be examined in a museum, and that every single time you play the style, you're not being in the moment, which is what jazz is about, being in the moment, improvising in the moment. And I think there is much more music to be made. Like the work is not done at all. There is much work to do. There is much music to be made and different ways to synthesize ideas. And I think another thing about creativity and being original that people look over, like there's a common misconception that originality is creating something out of nothing, like something totally new. But to me, creativity and originality is also about synthesizing ideas in ways that no one has ever thought of before, and combining different ideas to create new perspectives that can really freshen up the culture and freshen up the music and create even more sounds. I mean, to me, a lot of the like lineages of like tenor saxophone, for example, Joe Henderson, Ben Webster, Sonny Rollins, like to me, that's all a synthesis rolling clay ball of like ideas that are evolving. And that to me is still playing the tradition. And I think we can still do that. And I feel like that idea, I don't know, ever since Brad Mehldau came on the scene and was better than everybody, that idea got lost. Yeah.
So how does that manifest though when you're creating something like this latest record? Like, how conscious are you of that balance of like using, I'll do a little food metaphor here, like using, traditional ingredients to make something new, right? That's kind of what you're talking about, of like being influenced by this music that we all love and letting that come through. Like, you just letting that happen in a fairly organic way? Or are you making decisions, as you're working?
Well, keep
on
in mind, I wrote this music like over a year ago, so at the time I was just trying to create like good music.
Mm.
But at the core of it, the idea that I'm, communicating right now, they're values that I've had for a very long time, for many years. It's guided pretty much most of my shedding, my everything. But like at the time, I didn't think of it that way. I guess now that I'm like a little older, not by much, it's like what, a year. I think of it differently now, and I'm able to, I guess, put it into more philosophical terms. I think it's bad as an artist to try to put forth an agenda when you're creating music. Like, I'm not gonna like say to myself before I write music, like, I'm going to show everyone that you can implement this philosophy. It's like, the reason philosophy exists is so that you can live it. So you're not thinking about it. So I guess it's more of like a reflection type of thing, to answer your question.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
I was just, Connie, one thing I wanted to jump back that you said about, tradition versus originality versus creating something new, and the pressures on new artists, really all artists in jazz, from either labels or perceived pressure from audience and stuff. And, this has been going on for a while. And what's interesting is I remember when Black Codes came out, and really just during that period, which was almost kind of the Young Lions thing kind of happened right after that. But that was sort of, the beginning of that. But, Wynton and that kind of sound was always accused of being backwards looking, and like basically the big knock, and this was maybe more from the critics at the time, which probably had a little bit more power than now, but it was like, well, you're just rehashing what the Miles Davis Quintet did on Live at the Plug Nickel and The Sorcerer. And Wynton was constantly having to defend himself and like, no, we're trying to do something original, but I love that sound. And then of course Miles was still alive then, so there was a little bit of a Miles versus Wynton thing in some other ways. But it's really interesting to hear your take on it now that there's a little bit of historical context and some time has gone by. But that was very much what the feeling was at the time. It was like, okay, Wynton is a traditionalist. He's going so far back into the tradition. And for those of us that were young at the time listening and looking up to that sound, and for me, Kenny Kirkland was like, you talk about listening to the record, I'm like holding the record and like, man, I want to be Kenny Kirkland and Herbie Hancock. And, so when they were like, well, they're playing like the Miles Davis Quintet, I was like, they're good too. It was, the perception of musicians versus like the critics. Yeah. And so I just wanted to throw that out there. And because I think, you probably have a really good feeling for now what the current generation of players coming up feels about these things,
Yeah. I think it's total bullshit to say that they were just rehashing the past. It sounds completely different. The evidence is in the music. Like, go listen to it yourself. It's nothing like, the Plug Nickel. It's a totally, that's the thing about straight ahead jazz. And that makes me like wonder about, I think critics have a different ear versus like a musician. So maybe when they hear particular elements combined together, they're like, oh, that's straight ahead jazz, so it sounds like that. And maybe to a more trained ear, like a more serious aspiring jazz musician, they hear the nuances in the language, similarly to how when you understand like a spoken language, Greek, French, English, like you understand the differences, but to a less fluent listener or speaker, it might just all sound the same. So
I think, Connie, what you nailed about this, you said earlier when you said the difference that you really hear is that influence of fusion, especially on Kenny Kirkland and Tane, and the rhythmic vocabulary that's completely changed from things like The Sorcerer or the Plug Nickel or something like that. It's, yes, like the superficial sounds might be somewhat similar, but the rhythmic vocabulary is like a whole different planet that they're coming from, through a whole different filter. So I thought that I never actually thought about Black Codes like that as having that influence from fusion. But now that I just think about it for 2 seconds, it's like, oh yeah, of course, duh. Like it's right there.
I think if you ask musicians, they either wouldn't admit it or they'd be like, no. But you can't escape the influence of the generation that you're born in, and that was like post fusion, and like you don't have that era to inform the music of the plugged nickel, of all those quintet records. So like maybe the philosophy is similar in how daring and like relentless it was with Tony Williams, but it's a totally different animal. And for critics to say that it was the same, or not original, or reversing course, to me that's just critics being critics, and the music will stand the test of time, not the critics' reviews. So yeah.
Well, everybody,
Absolutely.
make sure we put a link here in the comments, and we'll put a link in the description to Iron Starlet. This is Connie's new record on Mac Avenue Records, and we should y'all should we come back next week and talk about Black Codes again for half an hour? That was fun. We just do this every week. Just
Hey
once a
man,
week. Just go back.
I'll do it every week. I'll do it every week. Wait, Connie, have you? How do you feel? Are you hip to Kenny Garrett's songbook, to that record?
Oh fuck yes, I love that record.
Okay,
That's like the
I
other
figured
one.
you were. Well, because you're,
Yeah.
yeah, because I mean, you were talking about, Kenny and Tane and their connection. To me, they almost go next. I mean, it was quite a few years later. It was like 10 plus years later. But to me,
Well, it's
that's
even
kind
better
of like
because
the
they
amplification
sound
of
better.
their relationship.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Because they got better and they played together more.
Yeah.
I don't know, Pete. We might be
And
listening.
I want to
Go ahead.
say, I was going to say, it's funny when you mentioned the teen angst thing, because I was going to say that it sounds like it's teen angst because like they sound like young guys. Like it's great
Yeah.
music, but they all sound like young guys. The only guy who doesn't sound like a young guy is Kenny. Kenny has sounded pretty much the same for like ever, and it's absolutely insane.
Yeah.
But like Tane
Yeah.
sounds completely different on Songbook. Tane's still great on both, but like he's definitely the more refined, focused, like Octane Tane that we know of today. So Songbook is super dope because it's like an even more refined like pocket and vocabulary. It's like everything is more calibrated. So yeah, I love that record. And I also love their live recording. I'm sure you've seen it, the Jazz Baltica, where they open with Two Down and One Across on YouTube.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
so amazing. Oh
Yep.
God.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. It's with the same. They're playing a lot of that same music too.
Yes.
It's incredible. Yeah.
Thank you for bringing that
Well,
up.
this is
I love
awesome,
that
Connie.
record.
Thanks for thanks for giving us a chance to geek out on some stuff we all love. But it really it's so exciting to me, and it just speaks to the timelessness of this music. Oh, one more thing I wanted to ask you. So along these lines of like how we connect and have the intersections of generations through the music, what are your thoughts on young folks in general coming to jazz, not necessarily as players but as listeners? Because I've always felt like there's always been a younger audience, but I always feel like that's the responsibility in a lot of ways of the younger players to really foster that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not good with children or young teenagers.
I don't mean that young.
Yeah, we're not talking about like
20s,
Sesame Street age.
Yeah. No.
Honestly, like when you're a young person and you want to start always with the things that you like the most, I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think for some reason educators and people will look down on like people coming to jazz through gateway drugs that are not legitimate, I guess. But honestly, jazz is though fulfilling once you are able to listen to it and meditate on it and understand it, as it takes years to appreciate it. Even as like for me, it's been an interesting journey because there's a lot of stuff that I didn't like that I like now, which is why Black Codes was so dope to me, because I instantly liked it. It was so weird. But honestly, like jazz listeners at a young age, they should listen to what they like and work through the material, because it can be esoteric in its own way. I mean, I don't know how else to answer that question. I never really thought about it in those terms because I'm primarily a very hedonistic person. So,
Yeah, but I mean, even like along the lines of like college age and 20s and
Oh,
30s or
yeah.
whatever. Like a lot of
Okay.
times, yeah, yeah. The way the music, I always figure a lot of it's a kind of a venue problem because, young people, they want something for free or maybe $5 or whatever. We've gotten, it's like jazz in Lincoln Center and jazz at the Bistro. These are all wonderful venues everywhere, concert halls, but it's expensive. They think you have to bring a certain amount of knowledge. You look at places like, Smalls and some of the clubs in New York that are more accessible to student age. And, because what you said earlier about, the music is unexpected, it's improvisatory, all these things are very exciting to any age, almost more so to young people. But a lot of times we block it out just because we say, okay, there's a barrier to entry, either an actual barrier to entry or a kind of, thought that you have to do your homework before you come in and stuff. And we lose a lot of that fun aspect of the music, and I'm just hoping that, we can all work together to make the music accessible and to bring a younger audience to it.
Yeah, well, to me, anybody can recognize and be excited by energy and like fire and passion, and that to me is the element that jazz really needs. And I feel like, not through any fault of its own, the intent of jazz education is good, but I feel that over the years of jazz education trying to spread its influence on younger people, it might seem like this is some square shit and I'd rather go do something else.
100% correct.
Like, make jazz.
Basically, jazz education makes you hate jazz, possibly.
Yeah. Like, dude, I didn't even go to school. I went to UCLA for 1 week, and then I decided to pursue a professional career without professional schooling. And to me, jazz education is essential to a lot of people. Many successful musicians have gone through the gambit of jazz education. But I mean, speaking specifically from the perspective of like engaging young people, intelligent young people who are in like their 20s, maybe late teens, like the culture surrounding it has become so formal and stuffy and like just so like it's the antithesis of what jazz is originally about, which is like spontaneity, being hip, learning how to hang, like basic 101 stuff. If you want to like be in an environment of jazz musicians, that's the kind of stuff that is like antithetical, I think, to the way jazz education is conducted a lot these days. So I don't have the answers to that, but like that's my view on it. And I think, like I said, people will respond to energy and raw energy, like human primal shit. And if like we bring back the energy that's in like some of the greatest jazz recordings of all time, I think naturally people will gravitate toward that, and they won't see it as like oh, this is just some intellectual, inaccessible bullshit, I don't know. Yeah. So.
Yeah, no, that's I think that you're onto something, and it's all of us to do the not so heavy lifting, because like this is what the music's about. That's the authenticity that's there. We just have to do a better job of showcasing it. So okay, so your homework, we want to bring you back onto you'll hear it at some point. Your homework is to have that totally figured out, though. Okay, so how long do you need for that, Connie?
Well, I was gonna add, like, I choose to present myself the way I do, and I choose to piss people off with. I don't choose to piss people off. That's not what I try to do. But like, I will dress the way I want, and I will act the way I want. I will curse if I want to, because as an artist, jazz artist, like, that is who I am. And I feel like there needs to be more of that, like, unafraid. I mean, I'm not saying I'm trying to be that, because like that's who I am, but like I make it a part of, this is pretty meta, but I make it a part of my branding, to present myself a certain way and to be, more comfortable with things that most people aren't comfortable with, aka the sensuality and the sex in jazz. I mean, jazz used to be all about sex, and jazz used to be all about sensuality and being just exciting and passionate. And like I said, ever since, I don't know, like Brad Mehldau was better than everybody, and jazz education got super organized, and college took jazz seriously. Like it just became like associated with this image of like really drab, conservatively dressed, like older men. I don't know. It's we got to make it more exciting. You know, it's
Right.
primarily
No,
about the music.
I gotta tell you,
but
Connie, like,
yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, no, I mean, you don't know how many times Adam and I have said Brad Mehldau killed sex and jazz. I've always, as much as I love Brad and I love his playing, that's something that's come up constantly. So now we finally have someone to co-sign it with us. I feel better.
I really like that you mark epics in music by that moment that Brad Mehldau was better than everybody. That's a hilarious way to think about time.
Well, like, dude, he was though. I mean, I love Brad. He's just out of this world. Incredible musician, but my God, it's so like clinical sometimes. I don't think he intended that way, because it's his sound. It's so pure and it's so perfect.
It works well for him, but it doesn't work well for 100,000 other young white jazz pianists. I know what you mean.
Oh, dude, like
right. That's a lot he puts on his back there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's created all these clones that, are probably still virgins. I mean, mentally, I don't know. You know, like it's not good. I think music is the most important thing of all, you know, in jazz, but it's also the culture and the attitude. Like there is an attitude to being a jazz musician and a jazz listener and to partake in the jazz lifestyle. And I feel like as life has gotten, I don't know, I wouldn't say easier. That's debatable for many different kinds of people. But as the average quality of life has changed and the average person studying jazz has become more comfortable, there is it's different. And it's hard to, you know,
it is
to feel the same way and have the same lifestyle, you know, and it'd be absolutely ludicrous to like impose that upon yourself just to be like, I want to feel like a jazz musician. Like, don't do that. It's probably unhealthy for the most part, but you should. Yeah, these guys need to, I don't know, get laid.
The lifestyle has definitely changed. I'll tell you, my nephew's he's a drummer freshman at Berkeley, and when I was up there a couple months ago, I saw his dorm room. Man, it is like a Boston apartment in that building that they built on Mass Ave. It's very plush. The lifestyle of up and coming jazz player is very different. So I hear you on that. But I also think too that, you know, it's interesting, and we'd love to have you back to talk about, you know, whatever. This is fun. But one thing I wonder, you know, what your recent comments just now were, like the sensuality, the sexuality of jazz. Like that's something that's been very, you know, the last few years, there's been a lot talked about, mostly in terms of like being too male dominated, and is the music too closed off to any female performers coming up, and like what is the sexism and what are the barriers, like how much better do you have to be if you're a female coming in? And I think it's something that we've wrestled with as a jazz community kind of slowly in terms of that. And I know you're talking about two different things, but I'm sure you have some very unique perspectives on that, because you seem to just kind of blown past that and been like, you know, fuck Brad Mehldau and I'm here. What's up?
I didn't say that.
She did not say fuck.
No, I know.
I love Brad.
No. And on Brad Mehldau too, I remember that he was kind of annoyed, and I love Brad. We came up like lockstep together. I mean, he was like, you know, playing with Joshua Redman, and then I came in the band right after him, and then like he was really anointed right after that as like the next thing. But he's always had this to support it, so I never begrudged him. And you know, he used the aesthetic that he's familiar with, and you know, such a classical influence and all these different things that he put into it. But it definitely, you know, his will, you know, push the music in a certain way. But it's up to you and you know, to all of us to push it the way we want to push it, and that's what makes the tapestry, you know, what it is and what it can be.
Absolutely. I think we need to make sure that we ourselves don't fall into the trap of all those poor, sexless white guys. And hopefully, through the influence of these kinds of interviews and playing, honest music that comes from the source, that will, I don't know, change the course of some musicians and some ways of thinking in this music. Yeah. So.
Well, Connie,
Absolutely.
Thank you
well,
so much.
Thank you, Connie, so much. Yeah.
Come on.
We're a finely tuned machine here usually, man. We're like, Doc, the internet has us all messed up. Because...
No, this was an insanely fun and refreshing interview, and it was just so great to talk to you.
Yeah.
And it was great to get to know your story a little bit and the music, and can't wait to check out the whole record. Everybody check it out. Iron Starlet.
And I have to say, like, this is going to make
12th Mac Avenue. I'm giving a plug.
Yeah. And also, no, this is going to make it so much more interesting because we're actually interviewing Brad Mehldau tomorrow on You Hear.
It's going to be
so
so
we're gonna
awkward.
have these
It's going to be
great
super awkward.
stories and quotes. Yeah, it's gonna... No, I'm just kidding. We're not. We're not tomorrow.
Fuck Brad Mehldau. I did not say that.
That's the poster. That's the poster. Vomit, and then you wanted to vomit out on. No. It was.
Yeah.
It's all good.
Now, I love you, Brad. You're freaking better than everybody.
We all love you. Yeah, you're great.
Yeah.
You're great. We all know how great you are. Now just stop, okay? Come on, man.
Thanks, guys. I had so much fun. I had no idea that we were going to talk about black codes in such depth. Most interviewers don't know anything, so really great. Yeah.
Well,
thanks again, Connie.
Well, good stuff, and we look forward to seeing you here in St. Louis next year. But hopefully, we'll talk to you before then. Come back at any time. And stay safe, stay well, and best of luck. June 12th, dropping on Mac Avenue. Best of luck with the new album. It's great stuff.
Stay safe, stay well. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everybody on YouTube, for joining us.
All
Until
right.
next time, you'll hear it.
You'll hear